You're listening to our podcast of Nick Ferrari at Breakfast on LBC. This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
Good morning. 3 minutes after 7 on Thursday, October the 7th. He came, he saw, and he conquered the hundreds, possibly even 1,000 people inside the hall. But it's one thing to display to the faithful what of the rest of the country, as there are dark mutterings off that businesses and businessmen and women are less than impressed with the lack of content in the speech by the Prime Minister. Full analysis on that. There are other stories. I think I mentioned it earlier. Crisis in pig farming.
We are in a very, very dire situation. We're heading towards around 150,000 pigs now stuck on farms that should have gone to slaughter and into the food supply chain and onto our plates. Why? We need to find out why that is. Charlie Dewhurst there is from the National Pig Association. There was one policy, as I could see yesterday from the PM, a £3,000 boost for teachers. You'll be hearing from Education Secretary Nadim Zahawi later in the hour with more details on that. Plus, an LBC exclusive.
Dozens of schools are bringing back masks, and it isn't even winter yet. I'm LBC's Charlotte Lynch with the exclusive.
And the long-serving Conservative MP, Sir Peter Bottomley, who says MPs, they make more than £80,000. They're not being paid enough. He's on the show later.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Call 0345 60 60 973. Text 84850. Nick Ferrari at Breakfast on LBC.
Complete analysis of that speech yesterday. We've got everyone from Jonathan Powell, who served in a senior role, to Tony Blair, national newspaper editor Michael Booker, Andrew Neil, the broadcaster, and even Nick Timothy, who was a key advisor to former Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May, all giving us their views. But just as, and without wishing to be confrontational to any of them, possibly more importantly, I want to hear from you as well. But let's give you a little bit of background. I appreciate you, many of you, if you're into it, you'll have heard it a lot. Some of you might try to dodge it, but let's just review a little of what we heard from the Prime Minister. Gags, there were aplenty. Policies, not so sure. LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood.
We had plenty of style, but very little substance. And when it came to that style, it was classic Boris Johnson, full of jokes for the Tory members, mostly at Keir Starmer, Jeremy Corbyn, and actually Michael Gove's expense.
It's the first time since the general election of 2019 when we finally sent that core-droid communist cosmonaut into orbit where he belongs. If we listened to Captain Hindsight today, we'd still be in lockdown. We wouldn't have the fastest growth in the G7. If Columbus had listened to Captain Hindsight, he'd be famous for having discovered Tenerife. Pushed this way and that by a Corbynista mob of sellotape spectacled sans-culottes, or the skipper of a cruise liner that's been captured by Somali pirates, desperately trying to negotiate a change of course and then changing his mind. An idea so transparently right that Labour conference voted overwhelmingly against it. And I know there has been a certain raucous caucus from the anti-AUKUS caucus, but AUKUS is simply a recognition of the reality that the world is tilting on its axis. So we sent top government representatives to our sweatiest boîte de nuit to show that anyone could dance perfectly safely. And wasn't he brilliant? Let's hear it for John Bon Jovi.
Moving on to the substance, and this is where the Prime Minister fell short. All week, he and his cabinet ministers have been taking aim at business and industry when it comes to the current problems of fuel shortages and fears there'll be no turkeys for Christmas. Yesterday's speech was no different. Businesses couldn't blame Brexit. We were moving to a high-skilled, high-wage economy. And when it came to the supply of cheap labour from the European Union, the taps were being turned off.
The answer to the present stresses and strains, which are mainly a function of growth and economic revival, is not to reach for that same old lever of uncontrolled immigration, to keep wages low. The answer is to control immigration, to allow people of talent to come to this country, but not to use immigration as an excuse for failure to invest in people, in skills, and in the equipment, the facilities, the machinery.
That brought howls of protest from business. The usually supportive Adam Smith Institute called the speech economically illiterate. Industry group at the CBI warned of sky-high inflation. But this is all part of the government's plan to level up, bringing us to the only policy announcement in this 45-minute speech: extra cash for teachers to teach maths and science in disadvantaged schools.
We can do it. There is absolutely no reason why the kids of this country should lag behind, or why so many should be unable to read or write or do basic mathematics at 11. And to level up, on top of the extra 14 billion we're putting into education, on top of the increase that means every teacher starts with a salary of £30,000, we're announcing today a levelling up premium of up to £3,000 to send the best maths and science teachers to the places that need them most.
That's obviously Boris Johnson concluding Theo Usherwood's report. The Media View with Sunday Express editor Michael Booker in just a second. Let's get to the political input. And let me say here and now, of course I laughed at some of the gags, but I can. I'm very lucky. I'm currently in employment. I have not just lost £20 a week in universal credit. Candidly, if my gas or heating bills goes up, I'm not going to relish it, but again, I can make those payments. And I don't rely on food banks. And I think we have to look at it through that prism, don't we? Jonathan Powell is former Chief of Staff to Tony Blair. The laughs kept on coming, but in reality, how much longer can optimism manage to trump reality, as some would say? Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning. I think you're right. I mean, what struck me about it was he went for the wrong tone. He went for sort of triumphalist, boosterish tone, where most of us are a little bit worried about what's going to happen next, that things are getting pretty tight. And to set that tone, I thought was an odd choice for him. I would have actually tried to address the problems a bit more.
Noting you served as Chief of Staff to Tony Blair for a long period, Jonathan, and indeed Mr. Blair delivered 13 speeches at conferences, 10 of which were as Prime Minister. What tone might you have said? How would you have retooled that particular speech?
I think I would have reassured people and said the government's going to get a grip. This is not nothing to do with us. This is actually something we're going to do something about. We're not going to let the petrol crisis carry on. We are going to find ways of dealing with the gas crisis. We are going to make sure that your supplies get through for Christmas. I think people want to hear a message of reassurance that the people are actually going to do something about it. You know, I remember the fuel crisis incredibly well in 2000 because I was put in charge of it, and it was very, very difficult. I've got all the CEOs and COOs of the petrol companies in a room in the bottom of the Cabinet office 24 hours a day, me and Jeremy Hayward on the phones until we broke the blockade and got the fuel flowing again, just in time before we had to introduce emergency powers. So I would like to know my government is actually going to get a grip and tackle these problems, not just leave it.
Do you understand what levelling up means? But when I asked the Prime Minister during the week, it seemed to come down to ensuring that broadband was available in Ian Blackford's home in Scotland. But aside from that, not a lot more. Do you get it, Jonathan?
No, I don't. And as your commentator put it, there's very little substance in there to help us. Now, what he keeps saying is he wants a high-wage, high-skill, high-productivity economy. But the governments for the last 50 years have said they want a high-wage, high-skill, high-productivity economy. And he gave us not a clue of how he's going to get to it. And I understand why the businessmen have reacted very negatively to the speech, because it is economically illiterate. The only way you get high productivity is by getting those skills and investment in. It's not by stopping immigration of labour to deal with shortages. I mean, that will simply be inflationary. And I really honestly don't understand what's happening in terms of the economic advice that he's getting.
We'll look at that in more detail. Great for your time. Jonathan Powell served as Chief of Staff to Tony Blair. Thank you. For a long period, by the way. OK, that's the political. Let's get to the journalistic view. Michael Booker is editor of the Sunday Express. Thanks for coming on, Mick. Your readers, who might be nervously looking at the thermostat, turning it down a degree or two, waiting for the gas bill to pop on the mat or their direct debits to change, how might it have gone down to them? Morning.
Hi, morning. Yeah, well, I think if, as you say, if optimism heated your house and filled your car, we're in for a good winter. But that, as we know, that doesn't happen. But
you'll hear that line later without you being credited. Don't worry, go on.
I think it was the speech he's been waiting to give for 2 years, isn't it? Essentially, since he came, or nearly 2 years since he came to power. But the pandemic's been in the way. He's not been able to show off the blockbusting Boris at his best that he's been wanting to do. This, I think, he saw an opportunity to do in between what we think is coming to the end of the pandemic, and this is the kickstarting the next stage of the Boris Johnson government. I think he saw that window. Now, yes, businesses don't like the sound of it, but I think everyone in that room liked the sound of it yesterday, and a lot of people who voted for him back in 2019 did like the sound of it. Now, the newspapers, you've got the Telegraph, you've got the Express and the Mail all coming out with leaders saying that Telegraph saying he's a patriot who believes in the greatness and potential of the country. Yep. The Mail are saying it's vital and upbeat vision, but he's got to go further. And interestingly, talking to some of the MPs, the Tory MPs, while I've been up in Manchester, there's one thing that could bite him on this. Now, the Red Wall MPs, some of those guys, some of those women, we think of MPs as being very ambitious, looking for great jobs. A lot of those people have gone into it for the right reasons, speaking to them. And I think they will be absolutely heartbroken if levelling up doesn't actually materialise to mean something to the people that they are working for. And I think he will have a real problem with in his own party in a couple of years if it hasn't actually crystallised into something that means something to their lives. And as my 71-year-old mother in the northeast of England said to me, he better not forget us or he will regret it.
Last, no one would want to cross your mum, I'm sure of that, Mick. Lastly, but isn't this what you get with Boris Johnson? You don't buy Cristiano Ronaldo and put him in the back four. This is what you have Boris Johnson on earth to do, this extraordinary level of optimism, charge the troops and send them back across the country, north, south or across the Red Wall.
It is. It's exactly what he was voted in for, and I think it's what his party wanted. They didn't want some gloomy old leader like Theresa May, and that kept on coming up during conference. Oh, remember Theresa May's conferences? Oh, it was terrible. This is what they wanted, and I think that, we're going to have a tough winter, but I think politically Boris has kicked it off well, and let's see where we go from here. But at the moment, he sent them all packing off into the constituencies, very, very happy.
Thanks for that. Michael Booker is editor of the Sunday Express. Read all about it this weekend. Of course, there will be comprehensive coverage, not just of the Prime Minister, but the aftermath, and that line that both my contributors there have talked about business. Your reactions, and I appreciate you've been, and I do, it's great to hear from you, because obviously, quite rightly, my colleagues have been asking you what you thought of it. John, you will be the first caller on that. There are other stories which will also reflect after the news. The first malaria vaccine on the planet. Here's the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros.
This vaccine is a gift to the world, but its value will be felt most in Africa, because that's where the burden of malaria is greatest.
Plus,
dozens of schools are bringing back masks, and it isn't even winter yet. I'm LBC's Charlotte Lynch with the exclusive.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
With the British Airways American Express Accelerating Business Card. Turn everyday purchases into travel.
19 after 7. John, coming to you in a moment. Front pages of the newspapers, well, we briefly touched on them. Booster Boris's Tory love-in is the Daily Mail, and the picture is him kissing his wife, Carrie, after the speech. There he is embracing his wife on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. PM pledges no homes on green fields. It's an interesting that they pull out that one. The Daily Express, as Michael Booker, the editor of the Sunday Express, was pointing out, very supportive. Iron Man Boris, I'll unleash the spirit of Britain. Front page of the Eye. There may be trouble ahead. This is in perhaps not quite addressing the cost of living crisis. Build back banter is quite a clever one for the Metro, because this build back better, build back batter, build back burger, and on it goes. The Times picks up on something that we're going to look at in more detail. The Prime Minister hit by business backlash. That's the front page of the Times. And the same theme for The Guardian. Business anger at vacuous and bombastic Prime Minister's speech. That's those words come from the Adam Smith Institute, which is a fairly influential one, has to say, economic institute. Lastly, the Financial Times actually goes... There is a piece of Boris Johnson, but their lead is gas markets whipsaw after Putin offers to stabilise energy prices. More on that in our regular look at the world of finance, which is around 12 minutes away. The Daily Mirror has this farming crisis that we're talking about, farming hit by staff crisis, and a picture of a pig there, and indeed a picture of a pig farmer. We're covering that in more detail. I still can't quite work out why we've got to kill 100,000 pigs, but hopefully by the end of the show we'll be a little clearer on that. And lastly, one Premier League football star has been arrested by police officers and is being questioned in connection with a sexual charge. I don't think we're going to name him. I'll have a think about that. But I can tell you he plays for Brighton and Hove Albion, and this took place in Brighton, and that he's a 25-year-old man. Let's leave that there, because I think possibly the Sun, noting that no other paper has done that, we've got to try and, if the bloke, if he is required, he is to be afforded a fair trial. So let's just park that there. It's a 25-year-old player with Brighton and Hove Albion under arrest. OK, 7:21. My thanks to John in Brighton. Come on then. What did you make of it? Good morning.
Hi there, Nick. I think Boris has given up making a load of childish schoolboy gags, and it was just a load of deluded nonsense with no answers to anything.
You say he's given up, and you may well be right. Let me do this a different way. When did he last say a policy that actually hit home with you? Can I put it to you that this is the Boris you get? This is the Boris the Conservative Party pay for and get and adore.
Well, yeah, that's what the Tory party get, but what about the public? And what do they want to hear what he's going to do. He's been making these claims about building a high skill, high wage economy and all these things, and we've got a load of crises coming out of the woodwork for the country.
And I don't expect you to say every single word, of course, but just briefly, what did you want to hear then?
Well, I think like some of the commentary you've had from the papers, something a bit more serious,
yes,
and some substantial. Something you get your teeth into.
Thanks for that, John. Thanks for hanging on the line, noting you're in Brighton, of course, which is where the Labour Party had its conference. It'll be interesting. We'll move on from this in a moment. It'll be interesting. The weekend papers, I absolutely guarantee, as they always do, and quite rightly so, there will be polls in some of the weekend papers, and then we'll probably get a sense of, and to judge it by the room, of course, or indeed most of the city yesterday, Manchester would be wholly false, because it is, as I always call it, preaching to the faithful. It's how it goes down with folk perhaps such as John and others. So we'll see how those papers go with those polls. Let's move to other subjects. We will return, of course. I told you, expert analysis coming up. Broadcaster, journalist, former national newspaper editor Andrew Neil is coming, and Nick Timothy, who's advisor to Theresa May. We will get their respective views as well. But a breakthrough in other areas. The World Health Organization approving of the world's first malaria vaccine in what's called a historic moment in the fight against the killer disease. Here's its Director General, Dr. Tedros.
We still have a very long road to travel, but this is a long stride down that road. This vaccine is a gift to the world, but its value will be felt most in Africa because that's where the burden of malaria is greatest.
I know the doctor's name is considerably longer than that, but after 3 days in Manchester, and I just won't get anywhere near it, so we'll leave him there. You know of whom I speak, and indeed the esteem in which he's held. To Sian Griffiths, who's Emeritus Professor of Public Health at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and has helped us, so many times through this pandemic and other matters, and joins me now. OK, for someone such as yourself who works in this field or an associated field, just how big a deal is this, Professor? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. This is a big deal. This will be hailed as a public health breakthrough because malaria kills about 230 million cases. There are 230 million cases a year,
grief.
and there are 274,000 deaths of children under 5, because 67% of the deaths. And so this is a huge issue, and it's half the world are affected by malaria, different parasites in different parts. But this is work that's been developed in Africa. It's taken a long time in the gestation. They did a large clinical trial with a vaccine, the TSS, and the results are very positive. We keep talking COVID terms of sort of 90 and 70%. This helps about 1 in 4 children prevent. It'll prevent malaria in 1 in 4 children given 4 doses over 4 years. Now, that's quite a program to institute, but it is possible. They put it into practice in 3 countries in Africa, and it does have the impact both on preventing and also reducing the severity amongst another 1 in 3 people who get it, particularly children and vulnerable people. So this is really good news for a lot of the world.
Professor, can you help me with this? The vaccine, which is known as Mosquirix, if I'm saying that correctly,
that's
was
right,
first developed by GlaxoSmithKline in 1987. I mean, obviously drugs need to be tested, of course they do, but 1987, that's 30 plus years. Why the delay?
Well, it takes a long time to make sure a drug is safe, effective. And I think you'll notice in the press coverage that they're talking about this will kickstart the efforts. I think people were feeling that despite the huge investment from, national, international groups such as Gavi and the Gates Foundation, despite that, the research in malaria had been sort of tailing off, and we hadn't seen any actual impact. There has been impact, but not much impact, not as much as would be hoped, because you have to put the vaccine alongside other measures. So that the other measures are the bed net, sleeping under a bed net, will help, that's impregnated with insecticide, will help reduce, particularly in children, reduce cases of malaria, as will insecticide residual spraying of houses. And these campaigns cost money, and we need to invest in them globally to help, because the poor and the vulnerable communities are the ones that are most hard to reach.
I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Sian Griffiths, Emeritus Professor of Public Health at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, talking about how we must invest globally in that. But tremendous news. I've just been going through some of the figures. 260,000 African children die in an average year. That's approximately 1 every 2 minutes. God, so since we've been on air, that's nearly 60 kids who've died. That's outrageous. That's a heck of a breakthrough, isn't it? We celebrate that. OK, that's children in desperate situations in sub-Saharan Africa. We'll come back to children in the UK, with nothing like, of course, the same. But an issue that will trouble some, which is, could be, the return of compulsory face mask or face covering wearing. LBC's reporter Charlotte Lynch reports. Charlotte.
Nick, we are only in October. We're yet to hit the winter, but already LBC's been told dozens of schools up and down the country are telling pupils once again they must wear masks. Head teachers reinforcing COVID rules in a bid to keep cases down. I'm told exclusively by the National Education Union, more and more are bringing back measures every day. Louise Atkinson's their National Vice President.
We're not being given the tools that we need. We were promised CO2 monitors. We were promised improved ventilation. We have some of the most overcrowded classrooms in Europe. We're putting people in overcrowded, poorly ventilated buildings. And the message essentially at the moment is wash your hands. That's not sufficient. It hasn't been sufficient all the way through this crisis, and it is not sufficient now. We need more support to ensure that children and young people are kept in education and kept in face-to-face education for longer, and that is the only way that we are going to be able to recover out of this.
Now, LBC's seen letters from secondary schools in Leeds and Newcastle telling parents regrettably but necessarily their child needs to wear a mask in communal spaces. Wolverhampton Council's advised all schools to bring them back. Some parents have also told me they're angry their child's parents' evenings will be held virtually rather in person, with 5-minute slots and fear of a dodgy connection. Now, the government's official guidance for schools says face coverings are no longer advised, but if there is a substantial increase in positive cases, a public health director may advise them to bring face coverings back. Now, it seems that is what is happening as the weather has only just started to turn. The difficult winter for the NHS that we've been warned about still ahead of us. And the number of pupils taken out of school last week because they or their classmates had COVID was more than 200,000. That's a rise of 2/3 on the week before.
Charlotte Lynch reporting. Charlotte, thank you for that. Coming up after the news, more of your reactions, of course, to that speech, but also from broadcaster and journalist Andrew Neil. And we've also got the Education Secretary. If you will recall that, of course, there was but one policy really outlined by the PM yesterday, this additional boost to get teachers of certain subjects. Nadim Zahawi joins us later to talk on that.
£3,000 to retain and to get new teachers in those subjects where we have shortages, in the areas we require them the most.
And what's going to happen to your gas bill is Putin unleashing the taps, turning the taps on. We'll be telling you about that in our business review in a few minutes.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
With the British Airways American Express Accelerating Business Card. Earn Avios while you spend.
7:34, just pause before we get to our look at the world of business. And I always study your emails. We've just celebrated the fact that there is a malaria breakthrough. Doug emails, this is great news. Does it mean 250,000 more people will need to be fed in a country where people are dying of starvation? Well, Doug, what do you want to do? Do you want to go the other way? Just watch the kids die? Everyone goes every 2 minutes. Hopefully I misread your intent there, Doug. There's a lot of reaction coming on that. We'll have some more of that in a moment. And, of course, we'll assess Boris Johnson's speech and broadcaster Andrew Neil, his view on in just a moment. Into the world of business, though, and I did mention when we went through the front page of the newspapers, I sense the FT, Financial Times, had quite a big story. Gas markets whipsaw, I love that word, after Putin offers to stabilise energy prices. What does that mean for Mrs Jones and her thermostat in Clapham? Here to describe it, David Buick from Aquis Exchange. What's it mean? Because we're all looking at our thermostats with a degree of nervousness, David. Unless you're Cristiano Ronaldo. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Nick.
Just turn it up all day long.
Absolutely. We've seen throughout the month of September gas prices rise by the best part of 40%, and this puts huge pressure on many people, particularly the less well-paid. It could add something around £160 to their existing bills, and also what's much more important, to the retail price index, that could trigger quite a lot of damage for the Chancellor when he comes to the budget on the 28th of October. But what was interesting yesterday, because we've known for some time that it was an adventurous but very dangerous movement by Chancellor Angela Merkel to do a deal with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, to allow Russia to control the supply of gas to Germany, which really means to the European Union. And we know that there's been a little skullduggery, to say the least, during the course of the last few weeks, where the supply of gas has been very limited, which has seen, obviously, its price rocket up. Well, he comes in yesterday, he terrifies me even just to look at him, to say, you need to deal with Gazprom, and maybe things will ease up. Well, it had the desired effect, Nick. Gas prices fell 9% yesterday, down to 2.71 to whatever the unit is. That is very encouraging, but it's not the end of the story. And I think we need to be extremely circumspect and just hope that the supply, which comes basically from Russia, as we know, they control all the energy from Iraq, Iran, and Libya and Syria. So it is quite important.
Thanks for that. Arguably one of the biggest business stories bouncing around, and you're a man who loves his football, and I think it's fair to describe this team as one of the biggest sleeping giants in the game, with a massive following. I speak of Newcastle. Have they got new owners, David?
They have. They've got a consortium from Saudi Arabia. Basically, what's happened to Newcastle in the last 15 years, Jimmy Schooler, Bob Stortwell, they would have turned in their grave and wore Jackie.
Ex-managers
Jackie
and players there,
players,
yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
This, I mean, I went to St James's Park, I hate to say this to you, in 1955, and I've never seen so many flat hats in all my life. It was wonderful to see Jackie Milburn score the winner. It was absolutely brilliant stuff. Anyway, back to reality. There was this... as I say, consortium from Saudi Public Investment Fund, including Amanda Staveley, who's been on this case for some time, and the Rubin brothers. The price is apparently £300 million. The reason it's being allowed to go through is that there was a dispute with the Premier League broadcaster partner, beIN Sports, and they gave assurances over whoever will take control that there will be no interference from the Saudi government. And that indicated that the lifting of the 4-year ban on Qatar-based beIN Sports being shown in Saudi Arabia, as well as the removal of all forms of privacy in the country, that has led to the deal going through. This has been actually gurgling away, I think it's the best way of describing it, for some months.
OK, grateful for that. We'll talk tomorrow morning. David Buick.
LBC Business Update.
With Direct Line Business Insurance. Receive the support of a dedicated claims handler should you need it.
7:38. The reviews are in on that speech. The Daily Mail lifting gloom with a vital, upbeat vision. But the challenge now is to make Build Back Better a reality, not just a slogan. The Times, entertaining boosterism. Johnson presented his party with a characteristically upbeat vision of the future, but gave the country little of idea of how he would deal with the challenges. The Daily Mirror, I just say it in that tone because, of course, it's much a Labour supporting party. Boris Johnson should have heeded the advice, if you have nothing to say, say nothing. And lastly, The Sun, buoyant MP is defying gravity for now. Now, that expression I first saw in an article last weekend by journalist, broadcaster, chairman of The Spectator, and, of course, former national newspaper editor and interviewer sans pareil, Andrew Neil, who joins me now. Business are not in love with it. Andrew, how concerned will Boris be with that? Morning to you.
Good morning. He won't be concerned at all because his main aim is now to bolster the red wall. These are former Labour voters. They're not big fans of big business anyway. It's now clear the 2019 election was a watershed in British politics in which if you were middle class, you were more likely to vote Labour. That turned things on its head. And if you were working class, you were more likely to vote Tory. That turned a century of voting on its head too. So the constituencies are different. The appeals that the Prime Minister makes are different. It's not just to the home counties anymore. It's to folks in Burnley and Bradford and Wigan and Preston and so on.
Do you understand, what do you understand by levelling up, Andrew?
Not very much, other than that it's a very good idea. Who could be against it? We've been an unequal country for too long. We need much more development in the Midlands, in the North, and in Scotland and Northern Ireland too. And of course, there's been regional policy for decades. It's not a new idea. You know, I did regional policy at university, and that takes us back to the days when dinosaurs roamed the Pennines and the Highlands. So it's not a new idea, but the problem is it's a good idea, but it's an idea without any flesh. And I think that the correct criticism, I mean, this was Mr. Johnson in world king mode. It was the first Tory conference in 5 years when the party wasn't in crisis. And so I can understand the boosterism and the bonhomie. I'm a I'm a humorous chap compared to Mr. Starmer, who's a bit gloomy. But and I put my words carefully, we've had 2 years of pandemic politics for reasons that everybody understands and couldn't be helped. But I do think that we had an expectation that we'd get some policy now. Where is this government intending to take us? What does levelling up really mean? When I interviewed a cabinet minister last week who's right at the heart of this, I asked him, how could we judge it come the next election? He was unable to answer. And so it really was policy light. There was only one minor announcement made in the whole speech. We have a right to know what levelling up means, what the policies will be, and we have therefore a right to judge over the next couple of years whether these targets, these aims, these policies have been implemented successfully or not.
Lastly, Andrew, many would argue, but that's not what Boris is about. What is priced in is this eternal optimism, this ability to make people feel good about themselves, to fill the hall with love, and that's what he achieved. Andrew Neil.
That's what he achieved, all right. There's no question. That's what people do. They do like his upbeat tone. They do like his humour. They like the fact he's not Mr. Gloom. All of that's true. But this winter, we're heading into a serious cost of living crisis, which will hit the poorest most of all. We don't know when the shortages on the supermarket shelves or the petrol forecourts will end. We don't know what the policy is on social care. We don't know what the policy is on the NHS, other to bung it more money. And we don't know what levelling up means. So, you can have all the humour in the world, and I welcome humour. It's good to have it. It's good for us journalists. You can have more alliteration, as Mr. Johnson had, than a West Coast poet from the 1960s on LSD. That's all fine. But we're a country with major problems. And we need to know what the government's solution is to these problems, and of that, Mr. Johnson had not a jot. It shouldn't be beyond the wit of mankind, or even a Prime Minister, Nick, to make us feel good, to make us feel happy, but also tell us what his policies are for running the country.
We need you back on the box, Andrew. I'm telling you that. Always good speaking with you. Thanks, Governor. Andrew Neil, journalist, broadcaster, chairs The Spectator, former editor of the Sunday Times. That was a good line about West Country. We like that. 7:43, Brendan and Hartlepool. Let's get to Hartlepool. Come on, this is where he needs to have hit home with the great north of the Great Red Wall. Did he? Good morning.
Of course he did. Good morning, Nick. Good show. Yes, I like it.
Thank you.
Yes, the reason I rang up originally is that you had a guy on from Brighton slagging off Boris in his speech. And I was going to suggest, far be it for me to suggest it to a great broadcaster like you, that you check who he would normally support. Was he a Labour supporter or a Tory supporter?
Right.
If it was a Tory supporter slagging Boris off, newsworthy. If it was a Labour supporter slagging Boris off, not so newsworthy.
Okay.
Personally, I'm a Boris fan.
Have you always been a Boris fan?
Always, right. Since I've ever seen him on TV.
And I'm going to ask you, and of course you don't have to answer, but have you always been a Conservative? You don't have to answer that.
Yeah, I quite. Apart from when in Hartlepool it was a waste of time voting Tory, I used to vote Brexit. But when Theresa was our leader, and even Cameron, I actually resigned my Tory membership. When Boris got back in, I took it out again.
Okay.
And yes, he's got problems, and he flim-flammed in his speech, but he's now got the pandemic on the back burner. He hasn't sorted out, but we passed that, and I'm sure he will start working to get the economy right, because he wants to keep the Red Wall voters that voted him in as much as we do.
Yeah. Let me ask you this.
But yes, I liked his speech. Yes, it didn't have much in it. But that's Boris.
And what would you say to someone listening, possibly in Hartlepool, who's just lost their universal credit? £1,000 has gone out of there. They might have not been able to get any petrol a few weeks ago, and they're worried about the gas bills. What would you say? And they say, come on, Brendan, why didn't he say something about that? What would you say?
Well, okay, getting under the fact we've never had any shortages up here. It's only you lot down southeast that are still queuing for petrol. But you can every day I've wanted to fill up my van, I've been able to go and fill my van up. Yes,
you know why that is. You don't panic up north, mate. That's why it is.
No, we've got a refinery 10 miles away from us. That's why. The North Sea oil comes into the Teesside, into Phillips Petroleum. Anyway, as for the universal credit, it was an uplift. People shouldn't have relied on it and said this is going to be forever. And it was when it was introduced, it's a temporary measure to get you over whatever. Yes, the energy prices are going up, but that's not really Boris's control, is it?
Really enjoyed talking with you. You have a great week. Oh, no, it's Thursday. It's just because I've got home, isn't it? Sorry, you have yourself a good day. I suddenly decided it's Friday. You have yourself a good day. It is Thursday. And we'll have more reaction on that. Also coming up after the news, Education Secretary Nadhim Zahawi. What does he make of the suggestion that Boris Johnson's speech was economically illiterate?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
With the British Airways American Express Accelerating Business Card. Check out the world.
10 minutes before 8 is the time. As we just wait for the Education Secretary to join us in our Westminster studio, let me take advantage of that and bring in some of the emails, texts and tweets that you're saying about the speech yesterday from Boris Johnson. Richard says, Johnson was totally full of schoolboy nonsense. I've changed one of the words there. Zero constructive things to say, not even worth listening to. Why are we all bothering? Yenoa, if I'm saying that correctly, the country is crying out for leadership and a clear strategy. Instead, we watch a rank average managerial pep talk. I have to say that's... Now, is the country crying out for... Yeah, you can say that, and a strategy. Yes, I think many would say that. But it was a clever speech. Whatever you say about him, he can write a speech. Now, whether it was the right speech at the right time, I agree with all of that. But we'll go on. Sean in Surrey, it was a terrible speech. If I wanted to go and listen to a comedian, I've gone to the Comedy Store. Food shortages, food prices rising, still petrol queues. Are there still petrol queues? I didn't see any, yes, mind you, I only went past 2 petrol stations. Actually, I didn't look. They might have not had any. I know I've told you this before. It's such a marked difference when you're in the north. Such a marked difference. I mean, if any of you fancy driving to Manchester to fill the tank, but I know it's rather self-defeating because you've got to come all the way back. Gas and electricity prices, going back to Sean now, gas and electricity prices rising, poorest people in society losing universal credit. NI will increase to pay for social care. Council tax to rise by £500. And Boris Johnson talks about building back and beavers. It's pathetic and it's insulting. Someone who asks me to keep their identity to themselves, so I shall. She says, I've been on disability benefits due to mental health issues for many years. I was completely disillusioned with the Labour Party, therefore voted for Boris. I won't pander to jealousy of the rich or demonisation of those in power. I find it to be a negative emotion that is unhealthy. I'm happy with what I have. I believe success often comes through some sort of struggle. That's life. We need to build up our economy, and sometimes life isn't easy and fluffy. We have to back it through the tough stuff to get to success. Thank you, sir or madam, and good luck to you with your mental health issues. I hope they improve. Barbara says it was appalling. Jokes about all this horrible crisis, cause for lockdowns, and a very communist logo in the background. Pablo says he played to the audience in the hall, not the British public. Well, again, that is always the situation, that you have to look through the prism, as it were, or whatever you want to call it, of the fact that he is surrounded by hundreds of the party faithful. And that is an aspect of it. Just a couple more before we have the Education Secretary. Jason says, gas prices are going out of control. You can't build back better without destroying everything first. This comes in from Thomas and Mardy. It's not about tone, but about problem solving. What policies did he announce that will solve the lingering problem he and his fellow citizens are facing? Fellow citizens don't want gags. Gags don't help them pay their increased bills. So it's at best a mixed reaction. But one policy that was announced, of course, was in the field of education, which makes it wholly appropriate that we can welcome to the show now Nadhim Zahawi, who is Education Secretary, joining me from the Westminster studio. Good to have you on, Mr. Zahawi. Just to listeners who perhaps were absolutely blitzed by the string of gags and witty one-liners, what was the policy that specifically addresses you and your colleagues? Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick. So we want to make sure that we retain maths, chemistry, physics, computing teachers, and hopefully retain them in those schools in the most disadvantaged areas of our country as part of our levelling up plan. And this is a up to £3,000 retention bonus, effectively. So those teachers in the early years of their profession, in years 1 to 5, can be eligible for that for up to 5 years. So they get basically a 10% bonus, effectively, because we're getting to a stage now, we're very close to having starting salaries at £30,000 a year for teachers. And it has worked in America. We've seen some really good evidence of this, that it reduces or increases retention by about 30%. So it's something that I want to make sure we deliver, and the Prime Minister announced it. He also, by the way, said skills, which very much sits in my remit in the Department of Education. And we have a skills bill in Parliament at the moment. If you told me when I was under David Cameron, when I was the apprenticeship, actually, not the apprenticeship czar, where I delivered the apprenticeship levy and the new standards, if you said to me there'd be a Prime Minister who would have a policy that you can at any age pull off modules to upskill or reskill, and we'll back you in the in that process, in the skills guarantee that we're offering, then I would have bitten your arm off.
But Secretary of State, why maths and science? Surely English is important, and can I put it to you, languages are desperately important as well, aren't they?
You're absolutely right. So foreign languages are important. It's really looking at where the shortages are. At the moment, where we have gaps in those schools that most need them, it's in physics, in chemistry, in computing. Hence why we're targeting this particular.
And do we know why? If we go further up the conveyor belt or the supply stream, whatever it might be, why might that be?
Well, I need to look at that, and you're absolutely right to say, what is it that we are doing that is doing well and producing good teachers in maths, physics, chemistry and computing, and what can we do more of and scale it? And part of that is teacher training, and I announced 500,000 teacher training opportunities because every kid needs a great teacher, and every great teacher needs a good training. This retention bonus is really very much targeted as at the sort of current gaps that I see in those most needy schools in the most disadvantaged parts of the country.
The reviews are in the morning newspapers, and you'll accept, Secretary of State, that they help set the tone or the agenda, and they are broadly very positive. Boris doing what Boris does, extraordinary optimism and boosting the country. But as some people have said, if you're struggling or you're worried about the gas bill, you've been queuing for petrol, possibly there's a labour shortage, you don't know if you're going to have a turkey for Christmas, how did it address any of that, Secretary of State?
That's a really important question. So if you remember, as we were arriving in Manchester, we announced £500 million for those families that are or you could be in most need of additional help, whether with food,
and took universal credit away,
utility bills. Well, that was always going to be a temporary uplift. That £20, we put that. By the way, that £20 was £9 billion of additional help in welfare.
But why
payments.
Take it away as winter bites?
Well, as I said, you want to focus the help, which is the £500 million, on the families that most need it and the individuals that most need it, as well as seeing the increase in the national living wage, as well as seeing a really dynamic rebound in the jobs market. That is all, on the sort of the plus side of the things that we've been able to do. The Kickstart scheme, £2 billion, the Restart scheme, £2.9 billion. So we're doing a lot of stuff that we were announcing at conference. The plan for jobs extended by Rishi Sunak with another £500 million. The PM doesn't need to announce everything in his speech, is really the point I'm trying to get across to your listeners and viewers.
It's a bit embarrassing, and noting, of course, that you've served in the skills side and others, when the Prime Minister's speech, in the view of the Adam Smith Institute, is bombastic, vacuous and economically illiterate. That's pretty embarrassing, isn't it? So we've had a good few laughs, but it won't pay the rent.
Respectfully, I would disagree, and let me try and bring it to life for your listeners through an example. I went to visit one of the biggest suppliers to the supermarkets in my constituency, Wheelmore, who do the fresh fruit and veg for the supermarket. I said, look, how's it going? Are you okay? They said, no, we're fine. We've got what we need to do. We know there are obviously tightening issues around our workers, but Rishi's tax break that allows to invest in capital, in machinery, we're going to do, and that will allow us to upskill and reskill some of our staff. That's happening across the economy. It's happening in retail. You've seen some great retailers invest in their people and their technology, and they've done well, and people like Topshop and Topman not do so well and eventually go out of business. So we're seeing a shift. Now, we have moved on things like visas for HGV drivers, for seasonal workers, increased up by 5,000. But that doesn't fix the problem. What the Prime Minister was challenging all of us to do is to say, what is the long-term fix? The long-term fix is skills, skills, skills. You upskill, you reskill. Right. The lifetime skills guarantee that I was just talking to you about, right? It is an extraordinary policy that this Prime Minister will deliver. That is where you need to be. We want to work with business. We will always be the party of business.
OK, last couple of questions. Coming back to the teacher conversation we had, noting that you're sitting in one of the great offices of state, courtesy with, and I hope I get her name right, Miss Mubarak, who was your head teacher back in Iraq. Was she a maths teacher, science teacher? What did she actually teach you, Secretary of State?
She was the head teacher.
She didn't have a subject as such?
So she didn't have a subject, but I was... to put it mildly, difficult and incredibly naughty. And actually...
What's the naughtiest thing you ever did at school, Secretary of State for Education?
Oh, my God. I tried to jump over a hedge, and there was a broken pipe, and it went straight through my skin, the flesh, and into my bone. On my shin, and I still got the mark on my leg.
I wish I hadn't asked that. So, sporting failure for you. Lastly, on a sporting note, and reminding everybody you were the vaccines minister, and with your team, you delivered that incredible tonic into our arms. At last, one England player has come forward, Secretary of State, Tammy Abraham, the first England footballer to say he is fully vaccinated against COVID-19. You don't need telling. This comes amid growing concerns in English football that players, national players or just Premier League, or old teams actually, there's not a big enough uptake. Would you commend what Mr Abraham's done, and what would you say to the others, Secretary of State?
Totally. Get the jab and get yourself and your family protected. We have administered over...
But why the resistance with with football players, do you imagine?
I think sometimes, from my experience as a vaccines minister, people were looking at WhatsApp and some social media from anti-vaxxers, completely untrue, were cutting through and cause people concern. What I would urge every football player and everyone in the country is, go onto the NHS website, look at Public Health England, look at our regulator, best in the world, the MHRA, look at the data and the safety information on these vaccines. They save your life, and of course they protect you and anyone who's vulnerable who's around you.
We've had marathon runners in their 30s fighting for their life because of COVID. COVID is indiscriminate, is it not?
Absolutely right. Delta is so infectious. The difference now in the world is who's vaccinated and who isn't. You see it in all the data. So I would urge everybody to get fully vaccinated. And of course, those who are eligible, get your booster jab, because actually the booster with a single dose of Pfizer or a half dose of Moderna takes your antibodies through the roof. This is how you get your protection.
All right. That's the lesson from the Education Secretary, Nadim Zahawi.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Yeah, morning to 6 minutes after 8, on a little bit late after that extended interview with the Secretary of State for Education. It's Thursday, October the 7th, coming up in this hour. Let's get back to the idea of levelling up. There are plenty of other stories coming through, but it does appear to be the one that, in fairness, the Prime Minister didn't seem able to address, and we'll remind you of what he said, and then we're out and about on the streets of a great northern city to try and find out more details about that. Also coming up in this hour, moving away, the Queen's Sheikh friend who hacked Piers' phone. This is an exclusive broken by today's Daily Mail. The Queen now under pressure to ditch her friendship with Dubai's ruler after the High Court found he ran an illegal UK phone hacking racket. That's like the news of the world. We'll give you more details on that. And crisis in our farms. Why could 100,000, broadly speaking, up to 100,000 pigs be facing slaughter because they can't be butchered and put on our respective food tables? It's later in the hour.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
If you'll allow that slogans are everything and get Brexit done is what got Boris Johnson into number 10 in part, or got him his stonking majority, I should say. The other one is level up or levelling up. That's what we're going to do. We're levelling up. This is why the people north of the Red Wall, we're going to level up. We're leveling. But what did it actually mean? If you were listening, you'll know that earlier this week, The Prime Minister joined me at the Conservative Party conference at the LBC studio there, and during the conversation, because I don't think anyone could really describe it as an interview, because he wasn't really giving you much space to get a question in, I asked him to exactly what levelling up means and how, crucially, and if we cut this bit out, so I'm going to... If you promise 20,000 new police officers, come election time, have you got them? Yes, we got 21,000. Great. If you promise 600,000 new homes, come election time, yeah, we got 600. You see where I'm going with this. There's a level. So how would we actually measure, come the next election, how the UK had levelled up? This was the Prime Minister's response.
Well, let me give you one example of a phenomenon that's already happening. There are all sorts of ways in which we're levelling up infrastructure across the country. If you look at gigabit broadband, when I became Prime Minister, it was only 7% of the country. It's now in some of the furthest regions of the UK, some of the most hard to reach places. Now 65% remote, cottage crofts in Scotland, such as the one owned by Ian Blackford of the SNP, are now all wired up.
Well, we can all celebrate. A nation rejoices.
A nation rejoices.
Yes.
But we're now 65% on
so
that.
Is that? It's
no, but I'll give you one absolutely stark example at the moment. The wage increases that we've seen in the last year or more than a year, are being felt most intensely, or the phenomenon is most pronounced for those on lower income. And that is levelling up.
So it's getting Ian Blackford's broadband. Is that what we're celebrating? I put that to journalist, broadcaster, chairman of The Spectator, former national newspaper, Andrew Neil. What did he make of that?
They do like his humour. They like the fact he's not Mr. Gloom. All of that's true. But this winter, we're heading into a serious cost of living crisis, which will hit the poorest most of all. We don't know when the shortages on the supermarket shelves or the petrol forecourts will end. We don't know what the policy is on social care. We don't know what the policy is on the NHS, other to bung it more money. And we don't know what levelling up means. So, you can have all the humour in the world, and I welcome humour. It's good to have it. It's good for us journalists. You can have more alliteration, as Mr. Johnson had, than a West Coast poet from the 1960s on LSD. That's all fine.
It's not going to get along. I'm going to butter the parsnips. 8:10. Let's go to one of the great cities, of course, that's so important to the Conservatives. I speak of Manchester. LBC's reporter Sarah Collins. Sarah?
Yeah, well, by my count, levelling up was mentioned 17 times during the Prime Minister's 45-minute speech to the Conservative Party conference yesterday. But we didn't get that detail on what it means and how it's going to happen. So we've been asking people in the city what they think the slogan stands for.
I've heard of levelling up, and I remember reading it and understanding it at the time, but I have no idea now what it is.
Levelling up is a catchphrase. It's actually meaningless in itself.
They've been talking about this for the last 40 years and nothing has ever changed. The rich still hold the power and the poor will always be poor.
Just about moving the economic power spread more evenly across the country rather than just southeast focused.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what level up means, and it would be great to say it in a way that our generation would relate to it a bit more.
Now, he did talk extensively about inequalities, hammering home that it isn't just about a north-south divide. In fact, he did highlight a lot of the problems that if you live in the north, you're already well aware of. So he talked about transport and how hard it is when it comes to crossing the Pennines. And if you have ever attempted to do that, it is a nightmare. In fact, he went as far as pointing out huge differences in health between towns in Lancashire cities, like in Lancashire and Yorkshire.
What monkey glands are they applying in Ribble Valley? What royal jelly are they eating that they live 7 years longer than the people of Blackpool, only 33 miles away? Why does half of York's population boast a degree and only a quarter of Doncaster's? That is not just a question of social justice. It is an appalling waste of potential, and it is holding this country back. Because there is no reason why the inhabitants of one part of the country should be geographically fated to be poorer than others, or why people should feel they have to move away from their loved ones or communities to reach their potential.
Boris Johnson concluding Sarah Collins' report. Let's push further up north away from Manchester and get to Middlesbrough. Andy Preston is the mayor of Middlesbrough. He's independent, joins me now. And noting you did not invent this expression, I absolutely realise that, Mr Mayor, but what does levelling up mean to the good folk of Middlesbrough? Good morning.
Hi, morning. I think if you went down the street, I think most people would be unable to give you an answer. I think what it means is about boosting those people and places who've had or are currently getting a bad deal. Obviously, that's vague. It's a great principle. It's about fairness, isn't it? And I think that's what people are getting at. But that's nebulous. I understand that. And it's difficult to prove that someone has delivered or failed to deliver.
And what do you think, again, the people you represent, how will they have viewed that speech? What are their, I would have thought, prime concerns are the possible rise in energy prices and the possible shortage of supermarket stores?
Yeah, you know what? It was a fascinating speech, wasn't it? It was baffling, it was hilarious, it was entertaining, it was impressive in many ways, but it was short on the content. What we've got to remember, Nick, is that wasn't meant for the man and woman in the street. Boris Johnson is not stupid. He knows that elements of the speech will filter back through the media, but it was meant for the activists and supporters of his to rouse them up. But absolutely, what is missing from this Tory conference is the fact that there are really difficult times ahead, and to me the country's on a knife edge. We could easily slip into shortages that spiral across all kinds of products. All kinds of bills that we receive get out of control, and what will happen then is people will turn on whoever's in power, whether that's Boris Johnson or whoever. They will become the focal point for anger and resentment. So Boris Johnson's got to be so careful. He's got to be much more clear and honest with the public, and he will find that the red wall turns on him if he doesn't do that. Fascinating. Speaking of a very good point you make actually about that speech. Probably the media become mildly obsessed with it, and should bear in mind the point you just made about playing to the activists. Andy Preston, enjoyed our conversation. Thank you, your Middlesbrough Mayor. An independent, by the way, just to stress that. All right, coming up after the news, the very important and influential economic think tank that says that it is, quote, economically illiterate. You'll hear from them, and of course your views too.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
With the British Airways American Express Accelerating Business Card. Turn everyday purchases into travel.
Now, the views of the Adam Smith Institute are on the front page of a couple of your newspapers, The Times and The Guardian. The speech yesterday was bombastic, vacuous and economically illiterate. I put that not to Boris Johnson, but I put it to the Education Secretary. He used the word respectfully. He didn't think that the Adam Smith Institute had fully studied the detail or appreciated what other measures have been taken or are on the way from the government. Let's put that to John MacDonald, Head of Government Affairs at the Adam Smith Institute. Well, your institute has made quite a splash with its view. Do you want to recalibrate in the view of what the government are putting forward now? Good morning.
Good morning. No, not particularly. I mean, great to hear from Nadeem. Always got time for him. But look, does levelling up mean anything? If it does, I haven't been able to figure it out. It sounded like earlier on the programme other people haven't been able to figure it out. And it also sounds like...
It is to get Ian Blackford his broadband, though, of course. We did learn that, John.
Well, Boris is good at that, right? He's always good at sort of selling in those big sound bites. But it was bizarre to hear him in his conversation with you reference wage growth in the context of the shortage of HGV drivers, which in reality is an unnatural hike driven by the lack of available employees and labyrinthian regulations.
Yours is not you personally. Adam Smith is not the only voice that's suggesting while he's good on boosting people and he's strong on optimism, when it comes to facts and figures, that's not what you go to a man such as Boris Johnson. Has this underscored that view, do you think, yesterday?
Yes. No, I think it has. As my colleague Matt Lech wrote yesterday, levelling up appears to be Boris listing off things that he likes about various regions and a mishmash of various vanity projects that sound impressive but in fact accomplish very little.
If you look economically, if I may use this expression, what could be the next and most dangerous shoe to drop, John MacDonald? What might they be fearing behind numbers 10 and 11?
I mean, the difficulty that they have at the moment, I think, is that the only concrete aspect of levelling up seems to be tax and spend and offer good vibes at conference. And it appears to me to be peacocking in the hopes that no one really notices how precarious the economy is looking, that another winter of discontent could be around the corner.
Do you think it is?
I think it's possible. I think it's early to say at the moment, but it's certainly something that they need to be getting ahead of rather than, with regards to things like the fuel crisis earlier, that they always seem to be behind on.
And your view, lastly, on inflation, or I've even seen in the last couple of days, stagflation, what might be awaiting us there, John MacDonald?
Well, I mean, I'm not entirely sure. I think Boris talking about raising minimum wages, for example, would certainly contribute to that. And again, it sounds nice as a soundbite, but it's economically illiterate. It'll in fact make it harder to run a business as they're coming out of very inhospitable conditions. It'll pass costs on to consumers and probably end up raising prices.
John McDonnell, thanks. Thanks for hanging on. I know we've taken you a bit later than we planned. I hope I've not disrupted your morning too much. You're Head of Government Affairs at the Adam Smith Institute. Thank you for your input. 8:22 is the time. Ed in Wilmslow. Look, no one can disagree with the idea of levelling it up. It makes perfect sense. But what is it in reality? Good morning.
Hello, Nick. Last time I spoke to you was when you had Esther McVeigh on the show.
Oh, golly,
for the Tory leadership election. I'm the guy from Winslow who's a disabled guy, and Esther McVeigh ended up meeting me for a coffee in a bar.
Yes, I do remember that, yes.
Conservative, Tory levelling up, well, I'll tell you what, people can't get a doctor's appointment.
Right.
People can't afford to buy food, even if there is any on the shelves. We're anticipating a dark, cold winter with a torch and a blanket. Levelling up, give me a break. These Tories don't know how to level up.
What do they know?
They know how to... it just seems like they know how to have a bit of a party and look after themselves and look after their friends. Cronyism, nepotism, that's what they know.
Lastly, while this doesn't in any way take away from your standpoint on this, have you ever been a Conservative supporter, or have you always been pretty much a Labour bloke?
My family were Conservative voters, but no, I've never been a Conservative and I never will be.
So, respectfully, and Ed, I really want to hear from you, and it's good to hear from you again after the Esther McVeigh conversation, unless he said, I'm going to give you all £1,000 a week extra money and I've just developed a cure for cancer and England's going to win the World Cup, he was never going to be able to say something, was he?
No, he was never going to be able to say something that's going to make people immediately wealthier or make people's lives better, but come on, we're going back into the dark ages here.
I absolutely, I hear exactly what you said, and I'm grateful for you, because it just helps my listeners get a form, and your views, absolutely, many people will agree with them. You don't have to dive too deep into the newspapers to find dissenting voices. Ed, thank you for that. Joss in Manchester. Joss, what does levelling up mean to you? Hello, Joss. Hello, Joss.
Morning, Nick.
Hello, young man. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. You can probably remember talking to me about The Simpsons.
You have an encyclopedia. You know more about The Simpsons than Matt Groening.
Some may say. Some may say. Right.
Just remind the listeners, what age are you now, Joss? Sorry, it's been a while.
I'm 15 now. Well, actually, no, I'm not 15 yet. It's my birthday tomorrow.
Have you got anything planned? What does a 15-year-old lad do on his birthday? Go around his mates for pizza and everything? Is that what you do?
Probably, yeah.
Nothing changes.
I want to talk about levelling up from the perspective of education. Now, obviously, I'm in quite a privileged position because I go to private school.
Right.
But I have to travel an hour there and an hour back.
Right.
And quite often, the fee-paying option isn't viable to everybody.
Well, no, not everyone has got mums and dads that can afford it, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact that there is a huge educational divide between the North and the South really doesn't get talked about enough. If you look at the difference between GCSE and A-level results on the top 20 schools thing that I think the Telegraph published, only 2 of them were in the North, and all of them most of them in the South were generally centred around London and Westminster.
Right. So when it comes to levelling up, I think, I'm not smart enough to put words in your mouth, Joss, but what you're saying is it's not levelling up as regards chances of young people going to schools.
I think, before we start levelling up, we need to make sure that everybody has a fair enough opportunity to grasp what they want to do and to educate themselves. And I don't just mean on the academic front of that. I mean, there needs to be more vocational schools, because people aren't always turned on
of course.
People aren't always turned on by academics.
I've got to move on to another story. Joss, I just want to ask you, you're 50, gosh, we haven't spoken for about 2 or 3 years. What are you going to... Have you worked out what you want to do for a living yet?
So I want to go to Cambridge and do economics, and I want to work in business with an aim to setting up my own business eventually.
Right, how much do you want? If I give you £1,000, how much do I get? 50% of the business for £1,000? Isn't that how that TV show works? No. Okay, if I give you £5,000, do I get... Come on, man. 6? No, obviously. Good luck. I must move on. Give my best. I know sometimes I speak with your mum as well, so do please give her my best. You sound in great shape. Good luck with your studies. Must go to other matters. Now, if the Daily Mail didn't lead the paper with a speech by Boris Johnson, it must be a heck of a story that booted it off. And it is. Here's the headline. Queen's shake behind hacked peer's phone. The Mail exposes plot by Dubai ruler to spy on wife in Britain. Goodness me. Rebecca English is royal editor at the Daily Mail and who, with two colleagues, has written the front page story and joins me now. OK, as I often say, Rebecca, for Mrs Jones in Clapham listening to this now, why is this important to her? Because it's played out at a level, I know you are mixing these circles, Rebecca, but I don't mix with Her Majesty the Queen. I don't mix with the ruler of Dubai. I don't even mix with royal lawyer Fiona Shackleton. Rebecca.
I love your optimism that I mixed with them.
Of course you do. That's how you get these stories.
But it is a fascinating story, and actually, it's a very tricky one, not just for the Queen, but for the British government, because Sheikh Mohammed of Dubai, who's also Prime Minister of the UAE, he's a very close ally of this country, politically, economically, militarily, and it all relates to a High Court case, a custody battle between him and his sixth and youngest wife, Princess Haya. She fled in 2019, saying she feared for her safety, for herself and her children. And during this court case, it has emerged, and a court has found on the balance of probabilities that it's true, that he actually instigated a phone hacking and espionage campaign, not just against her, but against anyone to do with the case, which included a peer of the British realm on British soil, which is utterly illegal. There are significant ramifications for both the Queen, who is a fellow head of state and a personal friend, and also the government, because, as I say, this man is an ally, but he's obviously been found by a British court of illegal activities on our soil. It's very tricky.
Your piece, and you and your colleagues, of course, I know teams worked on this. At times it reads a bit like a novel because it also involves the wife of a former Prime Minister.
It does, and actually, Sherry Blair was the person who first twigged that something illegal was going on. And you're right, it does read like a novel, but the shocking fact is every single word of it is true.
You, I think your legal team has had to fight legally to get this out there. Do we have any response from any of the individuals, the palace, the Dubai?
Silence from the palace, I have to say, and I was speaking to someone about this last night who says, I think they're just going to have to take their lead from the British government when they work out what on earth they're going to do and how they're going to handle this. Sheikh Mohammed has come out and said that he denies many of the allegations against him and has taken no part in this court proceeding, so he's very much trying to distance himself from it. But as I say, I think the ramifications will go on for some time as a result of this.
Read all about it in today's Daily Mail. Rebecca English is the royal editor on the title, and with a team has put the coverage together, and it is a team coverage. It runs across a number of pages. Thanks for that, Rebecca. Coming up after the news, I've just reread the story. Sorry, I reread the story during the last news break. I still can't quite work out why possibly 100,000 pigs are unnecessarily facing the chop.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
With the British Airways American Express Accelerating Business Card. Earn Avios while you spend.
Let's continue our conversation. We are moving towards the end of the coverage of the Conservative, well, certainly the conference, that has ended, but the speech. But let's have one last rattle through what levelling up might mean, what levelling up has achieved. That's probably the toughest part. Simon's in Basingstoke. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning, Nick. I think Boris is going to come to regret that speech very much.
Why?
The issues that we're facing in terms of the price of gas, the supply issues, are global issues. And they need the government to take proactive steps to start addressing that. And that's going to take years. But there was no indication of any sort of planning or approach to that. And then he's going to finally put the death knell to his career by signing us up to incredibly strict carbon emission targets, and at a time when everybody's going to be paying an absolute fortune just to heat their home.
I wonder if we should reflect on the words of Mayor Preston, the Mayor of Middlesbrough, who said, of course, and Simon, I'm very grateful for you, but this speech actually isn't designed probably so much for you or me, well, perhaps me as a journalist, but it's designed for the faithful. It's designed for people who will push leaflets through doors, who will do Conservative fundraisers, who will work now for the next however many months, 12 months, for the party. That's who his audience is. Do we need to reflect on that, Simon?
Well, I'm a pretty conservative person, but I think the thing about most conservative people is they'd actually like to hear concrete solutions and long-term plans. Where was the cutting of regulation? Where were the plans to incentivise businesses to reshore to the UK? That's what we should be doing. Does everybody forget that during the COVID crisis that we were literally desperate for PPE because we no longer manufacture it anymore?
Well, that inquiry, of course, is due in the spring, and it does need to be addressed there. Thank you for that, Simon. Katie says it was utterly irrelevant what levelling up means. Johnson doesn't ever match deeds with words. World-beating test and trace? We're still waiting. This comes in from Max. Britain does need to get rid of its inequalities and injustices. However, given that man can only spout meaningless drivel, it's all talk and no action. Peter in Croydon. Peter, your reaction to it. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Nick, if levelling up means spreading jobs and opportunities around the country, then absolutely yes. And, for example, making easier transport between northern cities and towns, then absolutely right. But I think the Prime Minister's going to need a very large spirit level if he wants to do all of these things. And how is levelling up helping anybody to do with the prices of fuel and gas and everything else?
But if we back up, that was why I asked him the question, to which I didn't get an answer. But, I don't see what the measure is. Do you see what I'm saying? I know I promise you 20,000 more police officers. I've got the measure. I promise you 600,000 new 40 new hospitals. I've got the measure. 600,000 new homes. I understand. I promise I will keep inflation at 1%. I get it. I promise I will level up. It's the most nebulous concept. How do you ever know?
Well, there's certain practical things that Boris could do. That very expensive train that we've all been talking about. That is crazy money, but that money
You're talking about
needs to
HS2,
go,
just so I make that.
Yes,
right.
All that money needs to go up to the north and sort out the small stations and larger stations, and then look at how else to improve the system. But all these little lines and sidings and things up in the north need to be done first. So,
Peter, thank you. I want to move on to come to other stories. I'm grateful to your input. Don't know if you're an animal lover or indeed you eat pork or whatever, but this might interest you because it's come to a story I've mentioned a couple of times, and the crisis in the pig farming industry, where distraught farmers are suggesting thousands of animals, there's even a figure of up to 100,000 pigs could be culled and incinerated because of a shortage of abattoir staff. The industry, they say, could be on the brink of collapse. They've pleaded with the Prime Minister to relax visa rules to help foreign workers plug the gap. The National Pigs Association points to the fact around 600 animals have already been killed, but the Prime Minister infuriated farmers this week by dismissing their concerns over the mass killing and declaring that is what happens to pigs in this country. We need to back up here. What's gone wrong? John Metrick is from the National Craft Butchers Association. It's a trade organisation of the meat industry. He is himself a butcher and a small abattoir owner and is with me now. My listeners, in fact, actually, John, I'll be honest, I'm struggling to see what's gone wrong here and how it hasn't been noticed. Can you give us some background? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. It's a dreadful situation. I think, obviously, there's been a disconnect, with EU workers going back to the respective countries, either because of COVID or Brexit, or because wages have improved in the countries that are around them. And unfortunately, we've been the meat industry on the large scale has been very much dependent on this overseas labour, and that labour isn't there. And the government seem not to want to help, even a short-term solution, so that these pigs can be used for food instead of going to waste. It's just a tremendous waste, or whatever way you say. I can't believe that the Prime Minister's been so flippant about it and comparing pigs that are just being killed because they can't be processed with pigs that are being killed for food. It's just not. It's not in the same ballpark.
You're going to help me with this, and please, I'm not trying to be pure out here, but surely, if we can't kill, is there a peak time to kill a pig then? Because if we can't kill it why can't we wait 6 months and when we've got more staff in, or it doesn't work like that?
It doesn't. I mean, the rearing time for a pig is probably for a commercial pig is probably in the region of about 6 months.
Right.
And what happens is that the small producers like ourselves, we've had bigger pigs coming into us from our pig farmers because they've been struggling. So we've agreed, because we're not stuck to a particular spec, we're not allied with a supermarket. So basically, we can use our skill as butchers to actually use the bigger pig, which is something. Obviously, the big processors are actually geared up to certain specifications to supply for the supermarkets, and the pigs are outside those specifications. One of the skills of a butcher is to be able to adapt, and a retail small butcher like us can do that, and we can make more bacon, which is like using a bigger pig. Right. But that's something that we can do on a small scale, but that doesn't seem to be able to be happening on the bigger scale.
Right. They've talked about it wasn't particularly successful, but in another crisis that we had, John, the government looked at easing the restrictions and allowing foreign truck drivers in, foreign hauliers to come and work here. Is that something that could be worked into this situation?
I think, Nick, it is. I think what we do need to do is get some visas for abattoir operatives, to be able to come over here, to plug the gap. And I'm not saying we do need to look at long-term solutions. We need to look at training more people in this country, but that's not a short-term thing. You can't train somebody to be a butcher in 6 months. This is years. It takes a long time. It can take 5 years to be a whole carcass butcher. So we've got to have something like that plugs that gap in the meantime.
Do we have British lads and girls training as butchers, or is there a trade?
Yes, we do. I've got 5 apprentices at the moment out of a staff of 35, and really some young people have looked at things like student debt and decided apprenticeships are a better way for them, and we're trying to make sure that we get the right work-life balance for them, so that they're not doing silly hours and unsociable hours. We're trying to make the job as attractive as we possibly can, but this takes time, and people have dumbed down our industry, Nick. People have told people that being a butcher is a poor job, and that's why that's part of the thing that's happened, and it is highly skilled, and it's so disappointing as a butcher that we've been actually labelled as that.
Lastly, noting that you said that some of the people might have gone back because the pay rates are having improved in their respective countries, there was an accusation regarding truck drivers that the industry allowed it to get into a situation where it was a low-wage job, and the Prime Minister would say, what we need to do is ensure that actually we bring back hauliers who are British and who are better paid. Was the pig industry, perhaps farming, was it exploiting cheap labour?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I can only say, from a small abattoir, our men are well paid, for the job that they do and what we can afford. We certainly don't look to pay low pay, because these are highly skilled, and low pay and high skill does not go together.
I'm really grateful. How long have you got? How much longer before this becomes a crisis? And it's tragic that 600 animals have had to be needlessly slaughtered. How long before that number's suddenly 6,000, would you say, John?
It's very difficult to say, because I'm not involved with the big process. All I can say is, a small producer with a small abattoir, we're totally unaffected. We've got a local staff that's like, there are farmers and smallholders part-time who are working in our abattoir, and so we're not affected by this at the moment. But this is one of the reasons we're pushing government to have a well-distributed set of small and medium abattoirs all over the country that are employing locally, and that we see as one of the long-term solutions to these. At the moment, we're too top-heavy with large abattoirs, and we need those large abattoirs, but we also need these small and medium plants that are unfortunately been closing, all over the place over the last few years.
Thanks for all the background. John Metrick is from National Craft Butchers. That's the trade organisation of the meat industry. He is himself immersed in the trade as well. He is a butcher and a small abattoir owner. OK, we'll take your views on that. It does seem a crisis, doesn't it? Another one. Also, coming up after the news...
Last year, councils announced that they would rename streets with links to the slave trade. Today, we can reveal how much that might cost. I'm LBC's Matthew Thompson with an exclusive report.
And in some instances, it's tens of thousands of pounds. Here's one resident's reaction in North London.
What? No! That's ridiculous. No! That kind of money. No. We need more centres for the kids.
That's a good point. Change your name or build a youth centre. Extraordinary.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
With the British Airways American Express Accelerating Business Card. Check out the world.
We'll talk pigs with you, Bob and Andy, in a moment, but I have mentioned this LBC exclusive, so let's get straight to it. And last year, goodness me, one of the big news elements to emerge was Black Lives Matter protests across the country. And as a result, several local councils announced their intention to rename streets they'd identified with links to the slave trade, or they feared links with racism. Today, we can reveal the true cost of some of those schemes. With the exclusive, LBC's Matthew Thompson joins us from what is currently called Black Boy Lane in Haringey. Matt.
That's right, Nick. Renaming streets with links to the slave trade could cost councils hundreds of thousands of pounds, we can reveal this morning. Several councils who, as you say, Nick, initially announced plans to review streets in the wake of Black Lives Matter protests last summer appear to have quietly shelved or delayed the plans in the face of those costs. We sent Freedom of Information requests to around 8 councils who'd said they had concrete plans to rename streets, and the results are rather striking. Last year, Hackney Council identified 16 streets in the borough. So far, they told us 2 of them have been renamed, but those 2 alone have cost £22,000. So renaming them all, even at that price, would take the total well into 6 figures. But the cost of renaming residential streets is likely to be even higher, because documents we've seen produced for Haringey Council reveal that the price of renaming one street, Black Boy Lane, from where I speak to you, could be as much as £186,000. Just let that sink in for a moment. And that's largely because the disruption to residents who would have to change their addresses on everything from bank statements to driving licences is such that the council has proposed giving every resident a £300 compensation payment. But the ones that I've spoken to weren't exactly enamoured with that idea, let's say.
No! That's ridiculous. No, oh God, that kind of money. No. We need more centers for the kids. For me, as a black lady, it's best you invest in our surrounding, our community. We need more libraries, a lot of housing. We got housing problems everywhere. On the streets. For what? No.
No, I don't think. I think it should be called Black Boy Lane because it's been called that for years.
And they shouldn't be spending money on renaming it?
No, I don't think so.
It can just stay that way. And it's been like that for all my... How many years I've been here? It's about 30 plus years. My kids used to go to the school down there, so... Yeah.
If I told you it was possibly going to cost £186,000 to rename it, do you think that's a useful use of public money?
Really, I think it should just stay as it is.
It's just waste the money, you know. I don't think so. It's the name change. You just leave the name how it is, and that's it. There's no point to spend the money on something. You can spend the money in something beneficial for the people. Don't spend the money on change the name, you know. Clean the street or do something beneficial. Not just spend the money I think it's not worth it, you know.
Now, faced with those figures, Nick, Haringey Council deferred the decision on renaming the street back in March. And they told us this week that a report with the proposed next steps would be considered by the end of the year. But there are signs, Nick, that other councils might be getting cold feet. After the Black Lives Matter protest last year, Newcastle Council, way up north, said they would review the names of 2 streets. When we asked them this year, though, they said the council had no plans to rename them at all. It's a similar story, for example, at Watford Council. So is it possible, Nick, that policies which seemed immediately politically popular in the summer of 2020 are now being quietly shelved in the face of the likely costs? I have to say, Best in Class award goes to Plymouth City Council, who spent a mere £600 renaming Sir John's Hawkins Square. But the crucial thing about that one is, Nick, it's not a residential area, so it has none of the costs that would be associated with Black Boy Lane, for example. Here's Susan Hall, who's the leader of the Conservative group on the London Assembly, and she was less than happy.
This is just so ridiculous, splashing thousands of pounds to rename street signs. It just shows a complete disregard for taxpayers' money and, of course, our city's history. When councils are supposed to be cash-strapped, which I genuinely believe they are, for them to even be looking at this is absolute nonsense.
Susan Hall concluding Matthew Thompson's exclusive report. She's Conservative leader on the London Assembly. Matt, thank you for that. 8:55 or 5 to 9. Let's talk pig farmers with Andy in Bracknell. Is this a crisis, Andy? Good morning.
I find it hard to see it as one. It probably looks different if you're in the industry. But what I wanted to say, Nick, was just the chap you had on before made comments. It really does not take 5 years to retrain someone into that sort of role.
Well,
in 1940,
I'm not a butcher. I don't know.
No. Well, let me give you an example. 1940, my paternal grandfather was a labourer for Redpath, the steel firm.
Mm-hmm.
They then had something called dilution because too many skilled men had been called up.
Mm-hmm.
By 40, he was trained as a plater, which is just about the highest skilled job in heavy steel work. They basically mark up, take an engineering drawing, work out how to make it, mark up the steel for people to burn and then weld.
Right.
By 42, he was cutting specialised plate for warships.
Right.
He was kept on in the role post-war and received an award for Redpath for fabricating a railway bridge that was meant to take 48 hours to drop in. It literally dropped straight in 12.
Right.
Now, he was...
what is this to do with...
semi-literate.
Right, OK. What's this to do with...
trained for that sort of job in 18 months, please.
Well, I mean, look, I don't know... You don't believe in 5 years training to be a butcher?
I suspect there's an awful lot of extraneous stuff and it's taken at a very leisurely pace.
Andy, thank you. Grateful for your input. Let's talk pig farming with Bob in Fife. Bob, good morning. Bob.
Hi, good morning from the Kingdom of Fife now. The real reason that this problem with pigs exists is, in my view, due to the greed of pig breeders.
Oh.
Now, not so long ago, I seen on television a huge sow being kept all its life on a shelf, so that it didn't roll over on the piglets.
Right.
If this is the barbaric way that breeders are going to look after animals, then I'm afraid there's always going to be an outcome of it all.
But hold on, until a number of months ago, there were plenty of people ready to farm those pigs and to work in the abattoirs, and the conditions would have been the same. So why would there suddenly be this moral outrage and nobody wants to work with pigs that are lying on a shelf again? Does that follow? I don't know. What do you think?
I think that there is, in fact, more education now. The new generations are looking at more animal welfare, and there's nobody against people eating red meat or anything, and I'm not against people eating red meat, but there are more. The new generation are not prepared to just accept animals being treated in such an unreasonable fashion. And I'm not going to mention any names, but there was a well-known food producer. He brought foot and mouth years ago to this country from his European plant, and the government gave him £900,000 compensation for bringing the disease from Europe into this country. They're needing to reduce the profits, increase the welfare of animals, and the new generation, they've got different views on everything nowadays.
And is it that's the reason why they don't want to go into butchery or abattoir working? Thank you very much for that. And the input, we will see, we return to that conversation possibly. But coming up after the news, we go back to politics, and Sir Peter Bottom, the Conservative MP, longest-serving MP, says politicians should be earning more. They earn approximately £82,000 a year, plus fairly healthy expenses. You'll hear from him on that. Staying with politics, the final assessment of Boris Johnson's speech. The gags were aplenty.
If we listened to Captain Hindsight today, we'd still be in lockdown. If Columbus had listened to Captain Hindsight, he'd be famous for having discovered Tenerife.
But the expert commentary continues with former Downing Street Chief of Staff and now columnist for The Telegraph, Nick Timothy. And if you can't spell, don't worry. The claim that universities might still afford you a first-class degree. What a load of nonsense. After the news...
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Morning, 3 minutes after 9 on Thursday, the 7th of October. Coming up in this hour, how much should your MP be paid? Be aware that many of these men and women, if they were to go into industry, they would command salaries double, possibly treble, if not more, what they earn. But then there is, of course, the public service sector. So is the pay right? Plus the extraordinary story. If you can't spell, don't worry, you can still get a first degree at university. But allowing for young people, or indeed anyone, who has dyslexia, should they be ruled out? And our final look at the Conservative Conference speech, or the speech at the Conservative Conference, I should have said, with Boris Johnson. The view of former Downing Street Chief of Staff, now Telegraph columnist, serving under Theresa May, that was, Nick Timothy. He's with me later in the hour.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
As we come to the end of the party conference season, and we've spoken with MPs from both sides, well, indeed, because the must reflect that the Lib Dems have a conference as well, the work that they put in, you start to see it and the sort of people that are attracted to it. And in many instances, these are very, very bright individuals who probably sacrifice a considerable amount of money by becoming an MP. Listen, if you're a captain of industry, you're probably going to start at £300,000, £400,000 per annum, and that's before pension benefits and other emoluments pile in. But, of course, you have chosen that life. And the other argument is that if you're working for constituents, some of whom are bouncing along on the bottom, finding it very tough on Struggle Street, why should you necessarily enjoy an enhanced lifestyle? It's a tricky debate, and entering it now is a senior Conservative, indeed, I think the longest-serving MP, Sir Peter Bottomley, who's given an interview to the New Statesman magazine in which he makes the case that they should earn more money. Sir Peter also has the title of Father of the House, and I have to say, I think I've been speaking with him since the late 70s, when he and I were both down in South East London. He was an MP and I was on a local newspaper. And he joins me now. Sir Peter, the country's in the state it's in, and you're saying you want more money. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Nick. You're right about your memory lane. But when you and I first knew each other,
yes,
I was involved in a debate in the House of Commons with Enoch Powell. Incidentally, I just interrupt myself to say that the New Statesman interview wasn't actually about MP's pay. It meant the point you reported was accurate, but it wasn't actually what the interview was about.
I apologise.
No, you haven't got anything wrong. Just trying to explain. In the debate in the House of Commons in the 1970s, about 1977, Enoch Powell interrupted me. But I was making the point that you can have a parliament full of church mice and you have a parliament full of the independently wealthy. But what about the people in the middle? What about the person who's deputy head of a large comprehensive school? What about the person who's been a Royal Naval captain? What about the person who may be your solicitor, your accountant? These are the people from whom you pick governments, official oppositions, alternative governments, and why exclude the middle? He said, wasn't I aware there are more candidates than there were places, and didn't this suggest that the terms were rather excessive? So the point was put back to him, instead of having any pay at all, why don't you have a tax of, say, £10,000 a year on being an MP? And if there are then exactly 650 candidates, would the right honourable gentleman be satisfied with the calibre of his colleagues? He remained in his place, muttering into his waistcoat the impertinence of those who hadn't been in Parliament very long. But I now have been in Parliament very long, and I can afford to do it for free. I don't. I take most of my pay. I give a lot of it, some of it away. Not that I talk about that very much in public. But the real point is, do you want to say that the Deputy General Secretary of the National Nurses Union, the College of Nursing, should be able to come to Parliament without a major sacrifice? Should your GP be able to switch to Parliament for a Parliament or two without a major sacrifice? And the answer, in my view, clearly is yes. Should there be a pay increase now? The answer is no. And I'm on the record repeatedly saying, never change the pay of MPs in between elections. Set the pay at a general election and stick to that until you have another general election.
How about this for an idea, Sir Peter? We pay MPs more, but we have fewer of you.
I'd agree with that, and I actually voted to cut the number down by 10%. Other people found reasons to object. Actually, it was blocked in the House of Lords now, I can't think of it. I would agree with that. But I think that the underlying point is, if your MP isn't worth the money, why not get a better MP rather than have worse money?
But you know better than I, there are some constituencies where they are always going to be blue. They are always, well, perhaps not always going to be red, but there are some places where you could have a very underperforming MP and you can do very little about him or her.
Well, the argument there is to have not necessarily an American-style primary, but you could actually have a challenge. And each time I've come up for re-selection, I suspect that those who re-adopt me do it by about 50 to 8. And the 8 could grow to the 50, and the 50 could drop down to the 8. So nothing's certain in life. But I also, just to cheer you up, I was once prison visiting, and I was paired up with a former editor of the Mail Sunday and of the Evening Standard. And while we were waiting for our friend in jail to come out to lunch, it was an open prison, he said, "Tell me about MP's pensions." So I did. He said, "Well, that's not very much." I said, "And you?" He said, "Well, I was very lucky. By the time I'd finished, I got a pension pot of £10 million. I got a pension of 10%, £1 million a year." So I said, "Dear Stuart Stephen," I said, "thank you for your articles about my nose being in the trough."
Lastly, you need Sir Peter to address this in the article, and I note it wasn't about this. It obviously came up in a subsequent conversation. You are quoted as saying, "I don't know how they, MPs, manage. It's really grim. An MP's salary, Sir Peter, £81,932, and this was, I think, the day, or it became public, the day that the government that you are part of cut universal credit."
Well, the article actually says that I wouldn't have done universal credit in that way. I'd have dealt with the increase, the temporary increase, and then the reduction in a different way. But that obviously isn't news, and I'm not complaining about that. What I would say is that we all know that average pay, full-time pay, is about $31,000. We all know that people on universal credit are in difficulty. That's why they get universal credit, to help them. It doesn't help them a great deal, but it does help them. The article was written on an interview a week before, so I didn't do the timing of that. And also, I don't think either the article writer nor I wrote the headline, which then got picked up. And we know in the media that one thing leads to another. So the New Statesman headline is picked up by the Metro is picked up by the Daily Mail, the Sunday Express, and off it goes. But one has to understand, they're not complaining about it. The key point is we have 650 members of the House of Commons, each of whom can be changed in the next general election. Each is dedicated to trying to help people avoid the worst kinds of poverty, to help those who are in difficulty. That's what we dedicate our lives to. That's what the team around us spend their time doing. And this thing about pay is worth considering, but in my view, should be considered before you have a general election. Set the rate of pay and consistently try to say, we want to attract into the field of competition good people, not just those who are prepared to do it for nothing, not just those who can afford to do it for nothing, but the people in between who have the kind of ambition that people have for their children. If you want your child to be a good teacher, a good social worker, a good trade union official, should you say to them, don't ever go near politics, because if you do, you'll find that you'll be significantly worse off. You'll be better off than many, but you'll be worse off than doing your existing job. I think we need to have a full range of talent in Parliament, including successful journalists and radio broadcasters.
All right. Lastly, I've just got a final one. I don't know if you left God's own land of Sussex for the delights of Manchester. I didn't spot you there. But in any event, did it feel like a Conservative Party conference, what you saw, heard or picked up on?
I actually spent my time in Sussex. On Monday, I was at the Worthing Mental Health Awareness Week. Right. Yesterday, I was celebrating the first female woman mayor of Worthing, a great woman called Ellen Chapman. And at party conferences, you obviously can't go into the hall when the leader's speaking, so I don't want to push somebody else out. And honestly, there are times when I think it's better for me to be in my constituency, serving my constituents.
I think I know what you're saying. Sir Peter Bottom is Father of the House and Conservative MP for Worthing West, the longest-serving, continuously serving MP, I should say, entering Parliament in 1975. My goodness me, I wasn't actually in the game then, but not soon after. OK, pay MPs more. I don't think you can with the current number, but let's cut them. 10%? Well, maybe go a little bit further than that. They'd have more people, quotes, to look after. Dave on the Rhymney Valley. Dave, what do you say? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Yes, very interesting, but totally useless. What I would say is MPs and all politicians should be working for the minimum wage. Oh. They need to identify with the people. And they get their out-of-pocket expenses, which will be controlled. But we will, by doing that, we will have people who genuinely want to serve the country.
Why don't we want to attract the best?
Because
why should someone?
What makes you think we've got the best now?
Well,
I don't.
Okay, no, that's a fair point. But why should someone be financially disadvantaged because he or she wants to serve their country?
Because let me explain my thinking. The thing is that when we do this, we will have people who have lived in the real world. Hold on. Do you think a doctor lives in the real world? Not really, no.
You don't?
They're in a bubble. And the thing is, we need people who have been and seen the suffering, seen the good sides of life, seen the bad sides of life. All-round experience.
Respectfully, when you say, what do you mean by seen the good sides of life?
Well,
because my sense is that you want fantastically hard-working, industrious individuals who really, really put in a shift, but if they've spent their life making that, why can't we have someone who has perhaps managed to get to the rank of a doctor, an army officer, running his or her own company, a solicitor? What's wrong with that?
Because it does not identify with the people. They all live in their own bubble. If they work the full life and are on an extremely good pension, you'll have good people. They will be good. They will be good.
Guess what? Training hard and working hard gets more money. And that's what these men and women do.
Oh, well, that is something I disagree with.
Well, then we're never going to find common ground. If you can't accept that train is a bad word. If you perhaps work hard at school, get some qualifications, go into a job, do an apprenticeship, work hard, put in an extra shift, you'll get more. If you're not going to see that equation, Dave, I don't know how we can move forward, sir.
Well, you were a metropolitan journalist. I'm an ex-computer worker in the valleys of Wales.
Right.
And we live in different worlds.
We do?
And yes, we do. Because I know of...
But I would imagine that possibly in your time you were making a little more than the average, than the average wage. I don't want you... You have a very cogent way of argument. I mean, really enjoyed speaking with you. I think you could possibly be a great asset to people of the Rimini Valley. Why should you have to take a pay cut to do that?
Because that is what is required. People, if I'm doing that, people can identify with me.
Okay. I mean, we've heard that. I'm very grateful, Dave. I think on this point, sir, you and I will have to disagree, but let's see what others make of it. It's 9:15, LBC News Headlines. Simon Conway.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
With the British Airways American Express Accelerating Business Card. Turn everyday purchases into travel.
Cut the number, pay them more. MPs, what say you? Tim in Leeds. Oh, sorry, I pressed button, my fault. Tim in Leeds, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Hi, Nick. Long time no speak.
Good to have you on. What are you going to say to this one?
So I'm not denying that MPs do a wonderful job, and I think that they're paid well, and I think they should be paid well.
Yeah.
But when you look at public services over sort of the last 10 years, particularly, I'm a nurse, I've spoken to you before about
of
issues.
Course you are. Yes, I remember that in COVID. Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So over the last 10 years, just before the 3% pay increase, nurses' pay was pretty static for 10 years.
Right.
Just get MPs' pay over 10 years, it had gone up by £21 on average. Similarly, looking at teachers, been about £5,000 lost over the last 10 years in terms of inflation. So, again, I'm not saying they don't do a wonderful job, a lot of them, but when you're struggling to recruit into a lot of public service work, such as the NHS or teaching, etc., the same argument goes that your MP was making about recruiting people and attracting them into the profession. We're not attracting teachers, we're not attracting people into the NHS because the pay is so poor. So if they want about levelling up, they need to level up public sector pay.
That's impossible to argue with that, Tim. You're absolutely right. Thank you for that. Angela Rayner could earn more in the private sector, really? Asks Leslie. Judy and Sutton Coldfield, by all means give useless politicians a pay rise, but no expenses beyond the basic fuel allowance or secretarial help. And no posh earphones. What does that mean? Jazz in Woodford Green. I agree, pay MPs more, but they can't work for anyone else. No columns in newspapers or anything else they do. Their loyalty must be to Parliament, not to sponsors or to the donors. Sal in Kensington. Sal, you're on the radio. What do you say? Good morning.